It was a night of high drama at the Royal Theatre in London. The grand chandelier glistened like a constellation, casting its opulent glow on the glittering array of aristocrats and socialites filling the plush velvet seats. The air was thick with anticipation as the final act of the silent melody approached, the audience hanging on the delicate balance of a scene that had captivated them for weeks. This night, however, would end in tragedy. The play had been running for 6 months to near perfect acclaim, thanks in no small part to the star actress, Miss Clarissa Ward. Tall, graceful, with a commanding presence, Miss Ward had long been a household name. She was the embodiment of the theatre, adored by her fans and lauded by critics. No one could have predicted that tonight would be different. In the final moments of the play, as the curtains fell to thunderous applause, an unexpected and unplanned event transpired. The lights dimmed and a scream sliced through the delighted buzz of the audience. The curtain did not rise for Miss Ward's usual bow. The actress, who had made her name by charming her way into the hearts of all who watched, was found backstage, dead. The scene in the dressing room was chaotic. Ward's personal assistant, a young woman named Evelyn, was hysterical, while the rest of the cast and crew looked on in stunned disbelief. A few inches from the body lay the bottle of poison, a quick-acting, deadly substance that could have been ingested only moments before. Yet something seemed off about the scene. There was no sign of a struggle, no indications that anyone had been near the actress when the poison took its toll. Her eyes were wide open, her expression frozen in surprise, but no one had seen her leave the stage. It was as though she had vanished and reappeared dead in the blink of an eye. It was not the kind of death one expected in a world of art and performance. This was no accident. It was murder. But who could have done it? The gathering of suspects. The theatre, normally a place of creativity and joy, was now a house of suspicion. The police were summoned, and Inspector Bradley, a competent officer with little patience for theatrics, was soon on the scene. However, the moment he arrived, he realized this was no ordinary case. He had been involved in plenty of strange deaths, but this felt different. He could not shake the feeling that the truth would not come easily. As the authorities questioned the witnesses, the suspects began to form. There were several who could have had motives to harm Miss Ward, all connected by the fragile world of theatre and the tangled emotions that ran beneath the polished surface. First, there was Henry Devlin, the playwright, a man whose career had faltered in recent years. His once promising works had failed to capture the public's imagination, and yet The Silent Melody was a runaway success. Devlin had struck a deal with Miss Ward that gave her a significant stake in the play's profits, and some whispered that Devlin resented the star's domineering presence in his creation. He claimed to have been in his dressing room when the death occurred, working on a new draft of a play, but could anyone trust his word? Then there was Evelyn Collins, Miss Ward's assistant. A young woman, freshly arrived from a small town, she had been devoted to Miss Ward for over a year. Some said she had admired the actress beyond professional admiration. She had even hinted to friends that there was a dark secret about Miss Ward's past, though no one knew what it was. Was it jealousy? Or perhaps something more sinister, something hidden in the past that was now coming to the surface? Oscar Trent, a fellow actor in the play, was another who had a suspicious connection to the actress. He played the role of Miss Ward's love interest, and while their onstage chemistry was undeniable, some said it was not confined to the stage. Was it a love affair gone wrong? Was Trent's passion for Miss Ward so overwhelming that it turned into hatred when the actress spurned him for another? Lastly, there was the enigmatic Catherine Brooks, the theatre's long-serving costume designer. A quiet woman, Brooks rarely attracted attention, but those who knew her well spoke of her rivalry with Miss Ward. Some claimed that the actress had made cruel remarks about Brooks' work, belittling her in front of the entire cast. Was it a momentary loss of control, the kind of thing that could drive someone to desperation? As the suspects gathered, Poirot's name was mentioned. His reputation for solving cases, particularly those where logic and psychology were the key, had spread far and wide. He was, as always, called upon to assist when the case was shrouded in mystery. Poirot arrives. It was an hour after the body had been discovered that Hercule Poirot entered the theatre. There was no fanfare, no announcement. He simply walked through the door, his polished shoes clicking on the marble floor, his eyes scanning the room with the precision of a hawk in search of its prey. He was immaculate, as always, dressed in his tailored suit, his bow tie perfectly aligned and his mustache as neatly groomed as ever. His very presence seemed to calm the frantic energy that had taken over the theatre. "Ah, mon ami," Poirot said softly, greeting Inspector Bradley with a firm handshake. "I trust I am not too late?" Bradley, though somewhat surprised, quickly composed himself. "Not at all, Poirot. The situation, however, is rather complicated. Miss Ward was found dead in her dressing room, poisoned, and we've no idea who might have done it." Poirot nodded thoughtfully, taking in the details of the scene. His sharp eyes flicked from one suspect to the next, observing every shift in posture, every glance that darted nervously. His mind was already at work, cataloguing his observations. "Ah, but that is the thing, mon ami," Poirot said, his voice low but certain. "A mystery such as this one is not solved by the facts alone. No, it is solved by understanding the psychology of those involved, the subtle cues in their behavior, the things they would rather not reveal." Poirot's gaze fell on the gathered suspects. "I will need to speak with each of them," he said, his words not a suggestion, but a statement of intent. "The game is afoot, as they say, and I, Hercule Poirot, will find the truth." As the suspects were ushered away to speak with Poirot one by one, the tension in the air became palpable. The perfect crime had been committed, and only Poirot's little grey cells could uncover the truth hidden behind layers of deception. Poirot stood in the middle of the theatre's dressing room, his hands clasped behind his back, his head slightly tilted as he surveyed the scene. There was no sign of panic in his demeanor, no rush to piece together facts too hastily. He was a man of method, and he trusted his little grey cells implicitly. The body of Miss Clarissa Ward had been removed by the authorities, but the room still held the tension of a crime yet unsolved. His eyes wandered over the dressing table, where her personal effects lay scattered. Rouge, a half-emptied bottle of perfume, a silver mirror, seemingly untouched by the hand of death. It all seemed so ordinary, yet the scene was anything but. Inspector Bradley approached cautiously, his face drawn. "Poirot, you have seen the room, the others. What are your thoughts?" Poirot paused, considering the question with the patience that always marked his approach. "Ah, mon ami, I do not form conclusions too quickly. There are many layers here, many hidden beneath the surface, and each must be peeled back carefully. What is important now is to understand the psychology of the people involved. Let us first see the suspects one by one. We will let them speak, but it is their actions and reactions that will tell us the most." Bradley nodded, but there was a hint of impatience in his voice. "I'm sure the facts will point us in the right direction soon enough. A woman of her stature, poisoned in such a way, surely someone will slip up." Poirot smiled faintly, the corners of his mustache twitching. "It is not always so simple, my friend. You see, what we have here is not just a crime of passion or a fit of rage. No, this was a calculated act, performed with precision. Someone knew exactly what they were doing." With that, Poirot motioned for the first suspect to be brought in. It was Henry Devlin, the playwright. He entered the room, his face pale and drawn, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his glasses. His air of discomfort was palpable. He was not used to being the focus of attention, much less the prime suspect in a murder investigation. "Ah, Monsieur Devlin," Poirot greeted him in his usual polite yet firm manner. "Please make yourself comfortable. We are merely going to have a conversation, nothing more." Devlin sat, his eyes flicking nervously to the door as though he might bolt at any moment. He was a man who had spent much of his life hidden behind the curtain of his work, and now, thrust into the spotlight, he seemed out of his depth. "Tell me, Monsieur Devlin," Poirot began, his voice soft but insistent. "Where were you when the incident occurred? Surely you recall the moment Miss Ward was discovered dead." Devlin swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the room. I was in my dressing room, working, going over some new ideas for the next play. I didn't hear anything, not a thing, until they called me into the dressing room." His voice cracked slightly, and Poirot noted the brief hesitation before Devlin had answered. "And your relationship with Miss Ward?" Poirot pressed. "Were you on good terms? Or perhaps, I wonder, were there some tensions between you?" Devlin's eyes widened, and for a moment he seemed to struggle with his words. "Tensions? No, not at all. She was a wonderful actress, the best I've ever worked with. Of course, I didn't always agree with her. She had her ways of doing things, but who doesn't, It was all professional. She made the play what it is, but it was my work." Poirot nodded thoughtfully, his eyes narrowing slightly. He could see that Devlin was struggling to maintain his composure. There was a nervousness about him, a sense of something he was not saying, something he was trying to hide. But Poirot did not rush him. He understood that every piece of information was valuable, and sometimes the most telling details were those that came out between the lines. After a few more polite questions, Poirot dismissed Devlin with a soft, "Merci, monsieur. That will be all for now." As Devlin left the room, the detective turned to Bradley. "There is something about that man, but it is not yet clear what it is. He hides behind his words too much." Bradley frowned. "You think he's involved?" Poirot's mustache twitched again. "Perhaps, but not yet. We must understand him better. Now let us see the others." Next, it was Evelyn Collins, the assistant. She entered the room with wide eyes, still flushed from the earlier chaos. Her hands were wringing together in a nervous gesture, and her voice trembled slightly when she spoke. "Miss Ward? Miss Ward was everything to me," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't know what to do without her. She was my friend. She was always so kind to me, even when others didn't understand me. But now she's gone, and I just..." Poirot's gaze softened momentarily as he watched the young woman. "Evelyn, you say Miss Ward was a friend. But tell me, what happened in the moments before her death? Were you with her in her dressing room?" Evelyn shook her head quickly. No, I wasn't. I was in the hall, waiting for her to come out for the curtain call. But she never came, and when I went to check..." Her voice faltered, and she stopped herself. Her eyes darted nervously around the room as though she feared the words would condemn her. "Did you know, Evelyn," Poirot continued gently, "that Miss Ward had a secret? A secret she shared with you, perhaps?" Evelyn blinked, her eyes widening. "A secret," she repeated, her voice cracking. No, I don't know what you mean. She didn't have any secrets. She was..." "Ah, but of course," Poirot said, his tone turning slightly more serious. "We all have secrets. Even Miss Ward, with her beauty and fame. And you, Evelyn, you would know hers, n'est-ce pas?" Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, and she took a deep breath. "There was something she said once, a long time ago when we were having tea. She mentioned a man she had loved, but he had betrayed her. She said he would never leave her, and she would never be free of him no matter how far she ran." Poirot's eyes sharpened at the mention of betrayal. "A man? Who is he?" Evelyn shook her head desperately. "I don't know. She never told me his name. She only said that he was dangerous." The revelation hung in the air like an unseen weight. Poirot's mind began to race. If Miss Ward had been running from someone, it could explain her sudden and violent end. But who was this man? Was he connected to the people here? "Merci, Evelyn," Poirot said softly, his gaze lingering on the young woman. "You have been most helpful, but now I must speak to others. I believe the truth lies deeper than we think." As Evelyn left the room, Poirot turned to Bradley, his mind already working through the possibilities. A lover, a dangerous man from her past? This adds another layer to the mystery. It will not be solved by facts alone, but by understanding the hearts of those involved. Bradley nodded, his earlier skepticism replaced by a new respect. "I see now why we need you, Poirot. You see things no one else does." "Indeed," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming with the promise of what was to come. "And soon, mon ami, we shall see the truth emerge. It is always hiding, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself." With that, Poirot motioned for the next suspect to be brought in, and the investigation moved forward, one step at a time, toward a revelation that would change everything. Poirot's next suspect was Oscar Trent, the actor who had played the romantic lead opposite Miss Ward in The Silent Melody. The man entered the room with a casual air, almost too relaxed for someone whose colleague had just been found dead in such suspicious circumstances. His tall, athletic frame seemed out of place in the otherwise dimly lit, cramped space of the dressing room. His smile, though warm, lacked sincerity, a fact that Poirot had noticed immediately. "Ah, Monsieur Trent," Poirot greeted him, motioning toward a chair. "It is good of you to join us. Please, make yourself comfortable." Trent gave a lazy nod and sat down, crossing his legs with exaggerated ease. "I trust we're not here for too long, Poirot. I've got a rehearsal to get to, after all." Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet amusement, though his words were carefully measured. "I understand, Monsieur Trent. However, I fear that this is no ordinary matter of rehearsal. You will indulge me for a few moments. After all, your co-star is dead. Surely that warrants a bit more than your usual attention to your next part, no?" Trent's smile faltered, but only briefly. Of course. Just a bit of nerves, you know. I've been in this business a long time, but I never expected something like this. Clarissa." He paused, staring at the floor as though lost in thought. "She was a real talent, you know. I've worked with a lot of actresses, but she had something special." Poirot studied Trent carefully. The actor's voice was flat, his eyes darting to the window, and there was something in his body language that felt rehearsed. "And your relationship with Miss Ward?" Poirot continued. "You worked together for some time, I believe. Were you close?" Trent leaned forward slightly, the faintest hint of a smirk appearing. "Close? Well, we had to be. On stage, it was all chemistry. Off stage, though, we kept things professional. Clarissa and I, we were just colleagues. Nothing more." Poirot's gaze narrowed. "Just colleagues? Interesting. I was under the impression that the chemistry between you two was rather convincing. Some might say it went beyond the stage." Trent's eyes hardened, the mask slipping ever so slightly. "You have your opinion, Poirot, but you don't know anything about what went on between me and Clarissa." A long silence stretched between them. Poirot let the tension build, his eyes never leaving Trent's. Finally, he spoke again. "But I do know that on stage, you played the lover, the man whose affections Miss Ward rejected. Perhaps that role was more than just an act. Perhaps there were feelings involved." Trent bristled, clearly uncomfortable with the line of questioning. "I told you, Poirot, we were professionals. That's all. I never got the chance to express anything to her. Not really. It's all just a play, isn't it? A part. A role." Poirot was not convinced. There was an edge to Trent's voice, a bitterness that couldn't be ignored. "Yet you say you had no feelings for her, no regrets. You know, it is said that a man's emotions can often spill over into his actions, whether he intends them to or not." Trent's hands clenched on his knees, his knuckles turning white. He took a deep breath and leaned back in his chair, trying to regain control of his composure. "I don't know what you're implying, Poirot. You've got it all wrong. I was in the middle of a scene when they found her. I didn't even know anything had happened until later." Poirot watched him intently, his mind already processing the clues. Yes. You were performing when the death occurred. But tell me this, Monsieur Trent. When was the last time you saw Miss Ward before that moment? Could you have been the one to have spoken with her just before she went backstage? Trent's face tightened. He knew Poirot was circling closer. He opened his mouth as though to speak, but hesitated. The tension in the room thickened, and Poirot pressed on, sensing the vulnerability beneath the bravado. "Monsieur Trent," Poirot continued, "you are an actor, are you not? A man skilled at hiding his true emotions. Tell me then, how did you feel when you learned of Miss Ward's death? Was it shock, or perhaps relief?" Trent's eyes flashed with something, anger perhaps, or maybe shame. But he masked it quickly. "It was a shock," he said, his voice almost too calm. "It's a tragedy, but like I said, I was performing. I wasn't anywhere near her." Poirot nodded slowly. "I see. Well, thank you, Monsieur Trent. You have been most forthcoming." He rose from his seat, signaling the end of the interview. Trent stood up quickly, clearly eager to leave. "I hope this is all over soon," he muttered, almost under his breath before walking out of the room. As the door clicked shut, Poirot turned to Bradley, who had been standing by, watching the interaction closely. "Interesting, is it not, Inspector? Monsieur Trent protests a little too much, non?" Bradley raised an eyebrow. "You think he's hiding something?" Poirot's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "Indeed. There is something about him, but we shall not rush to judgment. There is more to this than meets the eye." Before Bradley could respond, the next person entered, the costume designer, Catherine Brooks. She was a woman of few words, her pale face betraying little emotion as she entered the room. Poirot wasted no time in addressing her. "Mademoiselle Brooks," he said, his voice courteous but firm. "Please take a seat." She nodded silently and sat down, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her eyes were tired, as though she had seen too much in her time at the theatre, but she seemed calm, almost detached. "Mademoiselle," Poirot began, "you have worked with Miss Ward for some time, I understand. How would you describe your relationship with her?" Brooks' gaze flickered briefly, but she answered evenly. "Professional. I designed her costumes. She wore them, we worked together. That was the extent of it." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "You say it was professional, but surely there was more to it. You must have known her better than anyone. Did she confide in you?" Brooks's lips tightened, and she glanced toward the door as though gauging the distance between herself and the exit. "She was a star, Monsieur Poirot. Stars don't need friends. They have admirers. Yes, but friends. That's different. No, Miss Ward never confided in me." Poirot observed her carefully, noting the subtle shift in her demeanor. "Yet you seem disappointed, mademoiselle, as though you wish she had treated you differently. Was there some tension between you and Miss Ward?" For the first time, Brooks's mask cracked. Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly, and she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "She was arrogant," Brooks said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She thought she was above everyone. She ridiculed my work sometimes, in front of the others. She never took me seriously." Poirot nodded thoughtfully, taking in this new piece of the puzzle. "And that caused you distress, did it? Perhaps anger?" Brooks looked away, her hands now clutching the edges of her chair. "I didn't like the way she treated me, but I didn't kill her. I'm not a murderer." Poirot studied her for a long moment, reading the subtle tension in her posture. "No, mademoiselle, I do not believe you are a murderer, but I do believe you know something important. Tell me, was there anyone else who might have had a reason to harm Miss Ward? Perhaps someone she had wronged, someone she had crossed in her career? Brooks hesitated, her face darkening. There's always someone like that, but I don't know who. Poirot stood up slowly, his gaze steady on Brooks. Thank you, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful. As she left the room, Poirot turned to Bradley, his mind already working. She did not kill Miss Ward, of that I am certain. But she knows more than she's letting on. There is a hidden bitterness there, one that runs deeper than mere professional rivalry. Bradley frowned. So, who's our culprit then, Poirot? Do you have any idea yet? Poirot's gaze turned sharp, his mustache twitching ever so slightly. Ah, my friend, we are still only at the beginning. The truth is hiding in plain sight, waiting for us to unravel it. And unravel it we shall. Poirot sat back in his chair, his fingers steepled before him as he reflected on the conversation with Catherine Brooks. Her defensiveness had been subtle, but unmistakable. She had not killed Miss Ward, but her bitterness toward the actress was undeniable. Yet there was more to the situation than simple jealousy or professional rivalry. Something was being left unsaid, and Poirot was certain that the missing piece was just within reach. I believe, Poirot muttered to himself, we must look more closely at the connections that were not obvious at first glance. Each player in this drama has their own script to follow, but the true narrative, the one that leads to the truth, requires a deeper understanding of human nature. Poirot, Bradley interrupted, pulling him from his thoughts. What's your next move? We've spoken to Trent and Brooks, but I'm still not clear on the direction we're heading. Poirot smiled faintly. Patience, mon ami. The threads are coming together, but there are more conversations to be had. I believe that the key to this mystery lies not in the actions of the actors themselves, but in the reactions to their circumstances. It is in the subtle shifts in behavior when they think no one is watching. Bradley's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Poirot stood up, his posture as straight as ever. It is time to speak with Marian Fletcher, the understudy for Miss Ward's role. She was to perform in tonight's show. I believe she holds a crucial piece of the puzzle, and I do not think she will be entirely forthcoming. They made their way to the theatre's cramped backstage corridor, where Poirot, his small but determined frame, moved with an air of purpose. Marian Fletcher, a young woman with delicate features, was waiting nervously by the stage door. She stood when Poirot approached, her nervousness palpable. Ah, Mademoiselle Fletcher. Poirot greeted her with a polite bow. I trust that you are well, despite the unfortunate circumstances. She gave a stiff nod, her voice trembling. I don't know what to say, Monsieur Poirot. It's all so awful. Poirot studied her carefully, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the clenched fists hidden in the folds of her dress. Her anxiety was genuine, but there was something in her posture that suggested a deeper conflict. You were to take over Miss Ward's role tonight, were you not? Marian's face paled at the mention of it. Yes, I was. It's what I've been working toward for years. And now, she trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. I can't believe she's gone. I thought we were just rivals, but I never imagined this. Poirot took a step closer, his voice soft yet incisive. Rivals, yes, but rivals who would have shared the stage tonight were it not for the unfortunate events. You had hoped for a chance to shine, but did you also hope for Miss Ward's downfall? The question hung in the air like a sharp breath. Marian recoiled slightly, shaking her head. No, of course not. I never wanted anything like that. I just wanted my moment, my chance. Poirot's eyes never left her face. He could see the internal conflict battling within her, an innocent desire for recognition intertwined with something darker, something she was desperately trying to conceal. You were close to her, were you not? I understand that Miss Ward's life off stage was not so glamorous. She had her difficulties, and you, mademoiselle, you were always in the wings waiting for your chance. Marian bit her lip, clearly struggling. Her breath came faster. I was always in her shadow. I did everything I could to be better, to prove myself. But she always had the attention, the admiration, even from the critics. And I was just there. Poirot leaned in, lowering his voice. Jealousy, mademoiselle. It is a powerful emotion, one that can cloud reason. Tell me, did Miss Ward ever speak of her personal life? Did she have any enemies? Marian shifted uneasily, but Poirot could see the mental wheels turning. She was about to open up, just a little more. She didn't confide in me, but there were rumors, Monsieur Poirot. There were always rumors. She was involved with someone, I think, but I don't know who. And then there were whispers about Trent. Oscar Trent. Poirot's interest peaked and his sharp eyes flicked toward her. Oscar Trent, you say? The leading man. What whispers exactly? Marian swallowed hard. There were stories. People said they were more than just co-stars, that there was more between them, but it was all hidden, as if they didn't want anyone to know. But I saw how he looked at her, and the way she looked at him. Poirot's lips curled ever so slightly. You believe, then, that there was something between them? Perhaps more than just professional admiration? Marian nodded, though her face was conflicted. I don't know. It's just a feeling I got. She would act like she didn't care about him, but I could see it. There was something there, but of course you'll have to ask him yourself. He'll tell you that there was nothing, but you can tell, can't you, when people are hiding something? Poirot paused, his mind already racing with the possibilities. The actress's sudden death had thrown a shadow over more than just the stage. Secrets, hidden motivations, and jealousies seemed to be lurking behind every conversation. Merci, Mademoiselle Fletcher, Poirot said, his voice soft but resolute. You have been most helpful. Marian blinked at him, her expression unreadable. I hope you find out who did this, she whispered. I just wanted my chance. I never wanted anyone to die. Poirot's gaze softened for a moment. Your chance indeed, mademoiselle. But the truth, as always, is the most important thing. As they left the backstage area, Bradley fell into step beside Poirot. You believe she's hiding something more, don't you? She's not telling us everything. Poirot nodded, his eyes distant. There is something to her story that does not add up, but the key lies in the emotions that fuel her actions, not the facts alone. She wanted her moment in the spotlight, yes, but she also wanted to break free from Miss Ward's shadow. That much is clear. And Trent? Bradley asked. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Trent is not as innocent as he seems either. There is more to his relationship with Miss Ward than he is willing to admit, and his reaction to Marian's words suggests a guilty conscience. Bradley frowned. So where does that leave us? Poirot's lips twisted into a faint smile. It leaves us with a puzzle, mon ami, one that only the most careful observer could solve. There are pieces that have yet to fall into place, but the truth will emerge, slowly, deliberately, like the final act of a play. With that, Poirot turned on his heel and walked toward the exit, his mind already working to piece together the final clues. The game was far from over. As the night deepened, the damp London fog began to creep over the cobbled streets, cloaking the city in its customary veil of mystery. Inside the confines of the Starling Theatre, however, Hercule Poirot's thoughts burned with clarity. The interviews had drawn outlines in the air, rough shapes of motive, opportunity, emotion. But the picture was not yet complete. A pattern had begun to emerge, delicate and faint, like the first strokes of a sketch on canvas. Back at his hotel room, Poirot declined supper. He instead stood at the window, the amber glow of street lamps casting a warm hue against the glass. Hastings, were he present, might have commented on Poirot's unusual silence. But Poirot needed solitude, time to allow the threads to knit together in his mind. Marion Fletcher's confession of jealousy and her cryptic allusions to a hidden relationship between Margot Ward and Oscar Trent had stirred something in him. The emotional undercurrents were revealing more than any material evidence could. He replayed the interviews in his mind. The slight tremor in Trent's voice, Catherine Brooks's tight-lipped bitterness, Marion's twitching fingers. All pointed to a stage not only occupied by actors, but rife with performances even off the script. In the morning, Poirot arrived once more at the theatre, this time to speak with someone who had so far stayed in the wings of the investigation, the director, Leopold Hart. A man rarely mentioned, but one who would have had a vantage point over everyone else. Directors, Poirot mused, knew every note of the performance and every weakness in the players. Hart greeted him in his office, a cluttered room lined with scripts, costume sketches, and faded posters of past productions. He was a tall man with prematurely grey hair and a face carved by years of stress and precision. His handshake was brief, his eyes wary. "I understand you wanted to speak with me, Monsieur Poirot," he said, gesturing toward a threadbare armchair. "I've already spoken with the police, but if there's anything more I can do—" Poirot took the offered seat, carefully brushing imaginary dust from his cuff. "Merci, Monsieur Hart. I will not take much of your time. I merely wish to understand the relationships between your cast members. The late Miss Ward, in particular, was she easy to work with?" Hart gave a weary sigh. Miss Ward was talented, magnetic even. Audiences adored her, and she knew it. But off stage, she could be unpredictable. There were days she was late, others where she refused to take direction. But I tolerated it. The show demanded a star. And her relationships with the others? Hart hesitated. Oscar and she had a history. That was no secret to anyone backstage, even if they denied it in public. They were lovers, for a time. But it soured, as those things often do. And after the break, Margot was never quite the same. Still dazzling on stage, yes, but more withdrawn. Defensive. Poirot raised a brow. And Oscar Trent? How did he behave? He was professional, always polite. But I'd catch moments, just glimpses of tension between them. Arguments muffled behind dressing room doors. I once had to delay a rehearsal because Margot refused to perform a scene opposite him. Did you ever consider replacing her? A sharp laugh. No. Replacing Margot would have killed the show. She was the draw, the reason we sold out each night. Marion Fletcher is capable, but she doesn't have the presence. Not yet. Poirot nodded slowly. Tell me, Monsieur Hart, did Miss Ward have any enemies? Anyone who might have rejoiced at her sudden absence? Hart leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple. Enemies? That's too strong a word. But rivals? Yes. Catherine Brooks resented her. Everyone knew that. She'd been passed over too many times. Then there's the investors, particularly Harold Wren. He's financing the production, and he made no secret of his dislike for Margot. Claimed she was an unstable liability. Tried to pressure me to drop her. Poirot's attention sharpened. Harold Wren, you say? A name I have not yet encountered. You wouldn't, Hart replied. He stays behind the scenes. A rich man who enjoys having influence over the theatre world. This show was his latest vanity project. He and Margot clashed frequently. He wanted a certain tone, she wanted another. She never bowed to him, and he hated that. Poirot stood. Merci, Monsieur Hart. You have been most informative. One last question. Was there a rehearsal scheduled on the afternoon before Miss Ward's death? Hart blinked. Yes. Final run-through before the new staging changes. Everyone was present. Marion, Oscar, Catherine, and Margot. Were there any disagreements? Hart hesitated. There was a scene they couldn't get right. Margot insisted on a rewrite, claimed the motivations were wrong. Oscar argued with her. I told them both to take a break. The rehearsal was cut short. That was the last time I saw her alive. Poirot's mind turned over this detail carefully. Conflict in rehearsal, a clash of interpretations, art imitating life, or life descending into chaos. He took his leave and set off to find the elusive Harold Wren. The financier proved difficult to track, but a call placed from the theatre's manager led to a meeting at Wren's club in Pall Mall. The man himself, large, red-cheeked, and impatient, greeted Poirot with open irritation. "I've already said my piece to the police," he said brusquely, stirring his drink with a silver swizzle stick. "If you're looking for scandal, Monsieur Poirot, you'll find plenty in the theatre. It's a pit of egos and grudges." "I'm not looking for scandal," Poirot replied gently. "Only truth. I understand you and Miss Ward had disagreements." Wren scoffed. "Disagreements? I suppose you could call it that. She was a diva. Refused direction, argued over the most minor notes, thought herself above the script. I didn't like her, no, but I'm not a murderer, if that's what you're insinuating." "Non, monsieur, but perhaps you resented her. Influence over the production." Wren snorted. "She was the production. Hart refused to discipline her, thought she was irreplaceable. Maybe she was, but no one's bigger than the show. In the end, everyone bows to the curtain." Poirot let the phrase linger. "Everyone bows to the curtain," he repeated softly. "Unless, of course, someone fakes their curtain call." Wren's expression shifted. Confusion, then a wary smile. "Is that your theory, Poirot? That Margot staged her own death?" Poirot did not respond. Instead, he inclined his head politely and took his leave. Outside, he stood still for several moments, allowing the quiet of the fog to settle around him like a cloak. Something Wren said stirred a thought. Something familiar, but not yet fully formed. As he walked back toward the theatre, his mind drifted back to the dressing room, the position of the body, the open window, the fallen glass. Why had Margot not cried out? Why had no one heard her struggle? And then it came, the detail that had troubled him from the beginning, the teacup. Everyone had assumed it had been left by Margot, but what if it had not? What if it belonged to someone else? Someone who had come to speak with her in confidence? Poirot's steps quickened. It was time to reassemble the pieces and prepare for the next act of this unfolding drama. Something had been overlooked, but not for long. The streets of London were cloaked in a dense mist as Poirot made his way back to the theatre. The fog seemed to dampen all sound, as though the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for a revelation. His mind, however, was anything but still. The thought that had come to him so suddenly about the teacup refused to let him go. It had been so simple, so subtle in its placement, yet it now seemed crucial. He had seen it clearly during his first visit to Margot Ward's dressing room. A delicate porcelain cup, a trace of tea still visible, resting on the table by the window. No one had thought it unusual at the time. But now, in the context of what he had learned, Poirot felt a growing certainty that it wasn't Margot's cup at all. The actress, as he now suspected, had been too focused on her own performance, her own vanity, to think of something as trivial as tea. It was a detail, yes, but one that, when viewed from the right angle, began to shine like a beacon. Poirot arrived at the theatre with his thoughts tight and focused. The cast and crew were scattered, some preparing for the evening performance, others discussing the events of the past few days. He made his way to the stage manager's office, where he found Leopold Hart once more. "I trust, Monsieur Poirot, that you've discovered something," Hart said, his voice laced with exhaustion but curiosity in equal measure. Poirot smiled faintly, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the room. "Indeed, I have. But now, I must ask something of you, Monsieur Hart. The night before Margot Ward's death, did anyone else enter her dressing room aside from her regular companions?" Hart blinked. "You mean besides Marion, Oscar, and Catherine?" "Yes," Poirot pressed. "Did anyone else, anyone who would not be expected? Speak to her, or perhaps visit her. Hart's eyes darted toward the open door, his gaze flickering with suspicion. I don't believe so. It was a quiet evening. Margot was upset about the rehearsal, but she stayed in her room most of the time. Poirot took a step closer, his presence both gentle and commanding. A curious thing, no? There was a teacup by the window, but it was not hers. That much I am certain of. It was placed there deliberately. Hart froze, his expression betraying the briefest hint of unease before he masked it with a forced smile. Perhaps someone simply left it behind. People leave things all the time. Poirot studied him carefully, noting the slight shift in his demeanor. Perhaps, but I think not. The cup tells me something more, something deliberate. It tells me that someone was there, someone who had access, someone with a reason to be there. Are you suggesting that someone murdered Margot in her own dressing room? Hart asked, his voice suddenly thick with disbelief. That would be absurd. The security is tight. No one gets in without being seen. I'm suggesting, Monsieur Hart, that the death may not have been as simple as we have been led to believe, Poirot replied calmly. There are motivations at play here, personal, psychological. All of them intertwined. The director's eyes darted again toward the door, as though expecting someone to walk in. He cleared his throat nervously. And what do you propose we do now? Poirot's lips curled into a smile. I intend to ask a few more questions, Monsieur Hart. Questions that will lead us closer to the truth. But before that, there is one last thing I need from you. The security footage of the night of Margot's death. Hart hesitated, his brow furrowing. The footage? I don't think it will be of any use. The cameras, they were mainly for monitoring the stage. I doubt they recorded anything useful in her dressing room. Even so, Poirot insisted. I would like to see it. Every piece of information has value. With a reluctant nod, Hart led him down a narrow hallway to a small room at the back of the theater. A bank of monitors stood before them, each displaying different angles of the stage and backstage areas. Hart pressed a button, and the footage from the night in question flickered to life. It showed the usual bustle of actors and crew moving between rehearsals and costume changes. But Poirot's eyes immediately sought out the angle that would show the entrance to Margot's dressing room. The footage was grainy, but as Poirot watched, he could make out a figure approaching the door to Margot's room. It was too far away to identify clearly, but the figure paused just before reaching the door as though looking for something. After a moment, the figure continued on, and Poirot's gaze intensified. The timestamp on the footage read 7:35 p.m., the hour when Margot had supposedly been preparing for rehearsal. Poirot rewound the footage, his mind turning over the possibilities. A shadow in the corridor. Someone unfamiliar. But why had they been there? Do you recognize this person, Monsieur Hart? Poirot asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Hart leaned forward, squinting at the screen. It's hard to tell. But that figure, they seem familiar. Poirot turned to him, his eyes sharp. Do you recognize the person's gait? The way they move? Could it be someone from the production? Hart was silent for a moment, his lips pursed in concentration. It could be. I can't be sure. Poirot's brow furrowed in thought. There is something about the way they pause. It suggests they were uncertain, perhaps looking for a way in or a way out. And yet, they didn't enter the room. A missed opportunity. He rewound the footage again, this time focusing on the brief moments before the figure moved away from the door. The person seemed to glance over their shoulder quickly, as if to ensure they weren't being watched. Poirot's mind clicked into place. The figure was not a random passer-by. It was someone with a reason to be there. Someone who knew Margot well enough to take that brief, cautious pause. Someone who was part of her world, but had not been forthcoming about their presence. I will need to speak with the cast again, Poirot murmured, his fingers tapping thoughtfully against the desk. This time, I will ask the right questions. Questions they will not expect. He left the small room, the footage still playing behind him, and made his way back to the dressing rooms. His thoughts swirled as he walked, each piece of the puzzle coming into sharper focus. There was more to this than a simple murder. The truth, he was certain, lay in the hidden spaces, between the words spoken and the actions taken in the shadows. And with each passing moment, Poirot could feel the truth drawing nearer. The actors, he knew, were playing their own parts in this drama, but the final act had not yet been written. The play, as it always did, would reveal the deepest secrets of the human heart, secrets they all thought had been carefully hidden. The evening had fallen, and the fog now clung heavily to the streets, as though the city itself had been draped in a shroud. Poirot stood at the entrance to the theatre, feeling the tension in the air like a taut wire. The case was closing in on him, the truth just out of reach, yet something about the situation gnawed at him. Something was missing, and it was this absence that gave him the sharpest discomfort. Inside, the theatre buzzed with a controlled chaos. Actors were preparing for the evening's performance, their faces masks of professionalism that hid the undercurrent of fear and suspicion that had settled over the company since Margot's death. The tension was palpable, and Poirot could sense it in the way they moved, quick, jerky, like creatures trying to avoid being seen. He made his way to the dressing rooms once again, where the familiar faces of the cast and crew awaited his return. His first stop was Catherine, the young and somewhat naive actress who had been Margot's understudy. She sat nervously on a chair in the hallway, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her shawl tightly around her shoulders. Her wide eyes darted around the room, but she looked up with a forced smile when Poirot entered. "Ah, Mademoiselle Catherine," he said, his voice calm and measured. "I must ask you some questions. I trust you are ready." Catherine nodded quickly, her breath catching in her throat. "I'm ready, Monsieur Poirot. I don't know what good it will do, but I'll tell you everything I know." Poirot lowered himself into the chair opposite her, his hands folded neatly in his lap. He studied her for a long moment, noting the faint smudge of makeup beneath her eyes and the slight tremor in her hands. A woman on the edge of something, perhaps. "Tell me, mademoiselle, when was the last time you spoke with Margot?" Her lips parted, and she hesitated. "It was the night before, just before she went into her dressing room after rehearsal. She was upset." "Upset?" Poirot repeated, leaning forward. "In what way?" Catherine's gaze dropped to her lap, and she fidgeted with the edge of her shawl. She didn't say much. Just that the show wasn't right, that things were wrong. She looked at me, like she was about to say something, but then she just walked away. I thought it was nothing, but now I'm not so sure." "Did she seem afraid?" Poirot asked, his tone gentle but direct. Catherine blinked, her eyes suddenly welling with unshed tears. "Yes, she was afraid. I could see it in her eyes. I didn't want to believe it then, but now I wonder if she knew something bad was going to happen." Poirot studied her carefully, his mind piecing together the fragments of information. The fear, the unease, it seemed to reflect a deeper anxiety. And the more he listened to Catherine's words, the more it struck him. Margot had known something was wrong, but who had put her in that state? Who had made her afraid? "Thank you, mademoiselle," Poirot said finally, his voice soft. "You have been most helpful. Now I will ask you to remain here for a time while I speak to the others." As he left Catherine, the weight of the questions pressing on his mind only grew heavier. But it was the next conversation, one he had been dreading, that awaited him. Oscar, the charming but secretive lead actor, had been too quiet for Poirot's liking. He was handsome, charismatic, and yet there was something about him that didn't quite add up. Poirot found Oscar in his dressing room, fiddling with his costume as he stared into the mirror. The actor was humming softly to himself, his movements slow, deliberate, almost rehearsed. He looked up when Poirot entered, his smile a little too perfect. "Monsieur Poirot," Oscar greeted him smoothly. "I trust all is well. I heard you were asking questions about Margot." "I am still gathering information, Monsieur Oscar," Poirot said, closing the door behind him with a quiet click. "But I require your assistance. You were one of the last to speak with her, yes?" Oscar straightened, brushing his hands off and turning fully to face Poirot. "That's right. Margot came to my dressing room after rehearsal, but it wasn't much of a conversation. She was distracted. I asked her what was wrong, and she just brushed me off. She seemed preoccupied, like there was something on her mind, but she wouldn't talk about it." Poirot watched him closely. Oscar's eyes didn't waver, but the slightest tension in his jaw betrayed his unease. "You did not ask her to confide in you. After all, you were close, were you not?" Oscar's eyes flickered briefly before he forced a smile. "Of course, we were close, but Margot could be difficult. She had her moods. She liked to keep things to herself. You know how women are." Poirot's gaze never left him. "Perhaps. But you must understand, Monsieur Oscar, that I have seen many performances in my life, and I have learned that the greatest actors often hide their truths behind a carefully constructed mask. You, for example, hide behind a very charming smile, but I wonder if it hides something else." Oscar's posture stiffened at the suggestion, but his voice remained steady. "I don't know what you mean, Poirot. I'm an actor, not a murderer." Poirot's lips curled into a slight smile. "Indeed, you are an actor. But actors, they do have a way of telling lies, do they not? And sometimes, Monsieur Oscar, lies are more easily told when they are rehearsed." For a moment, the air between them seemed to thicken, and Poirot felt the subtle shift in Oscar's demeanor. The smile faltered, the mask slipping just slightly. "What are you suggesting, Poirot?" Oscar asked, his tone now hardening. Poirot leaned forward, his voice lowering. "I suggest, Monsieur Oscar, that you have been hiding something from me. Perhaps you have been hiding it from yourself." Oscar let out a short, sharp laugh. "I think you've lost your mind. There's nothing here, Poirot. Nothing you can dig up with all your little grey cells." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "You are wrong, Monsieur Oscar. You are very wrong." Without another word, he turned and left the room, the unspoken tension between them hanging in the air like a storm cloud ready to break. There was a shift now in the way Poirot thought about the case. The simple things, the things that no one seemed to pay attention to, had begun to matter more. The unspoken words, the way people moved, the little details that most would ignore. As he made his way back toward the dressing rooms, Poirot felt a change in the case. The pieces were aligning in a new way, and soon, very soon, the truth would be laid bare before him. But the final revelation was coming, and with it the understanding that not all motives were as clear as one might expect. Some were deeper, darker, and much more carefully hidden. But for now, there was only one thing left to do: confront the final suspect. And Poirot knew that this would be the most delicate, the most dangerous part of his investigation yet. The final suspect awaited Poirot, and it was a woman whose presence in the room could not be ignored. Veronica, the manager of the theater, the one person whose motivations remained the least clear. She was a woman who appeared to be composed and in control at all times, yet there was something about her poise that suggested a far deeper well of emotion beneath the surface. Veronica had a reputation in the theater world for being fiercely protective of her actors, but Poirot had learned through his inquiries that such protectiveness was often laced with possessiveness, a trait that could easily turn into something darker, more dangerous. It was to Veronica's office that Poirot now made his way. The theater, though bustling with rehearsals, felt almost eerily silent as he moved through the hallways. There was a certain gravity in his every step, a sense that he was nearing the heart of the mystery. Every actor, every stagehand, every gesture and word had been part of a carefully constructed performance. And yet, beneath the surface, Poirot knew that there was something far more sinister at play. The door to Veronica's office was slightly ajar, and through the crack, Poirot could see her seated behind a large mahogany desk. Her hands rested calmly on its surface, her fingers steepled in a posture of thoughtfulness. When she saw him, her expression did not change, though there was a flicker in her eyes, a quick moment of recognition, then a polite smile. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice smooth, controlled. "I had a feeling you would come to me next." Poirot regarded her closely as he entered, closing the door gently behind him. The room smelled faintly of lavender, and the soft lighting from the desk lamp cast shadows that seemed to soften the hard edges of her face. She appeared composed, but Poirot noticed the subtle tension in her posture. He sat opposite her, folding his hands neatly on the desk, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied her. "You have been very cooperative, Madame Veronica," Poirot began, his voice calm but insistent. "But there is something I must ask you, something that has been troubling me since the first time I spoke to you." Veronica raised an eyebrow, her lips curving into a slight smile. "I assume you're referring to Margot's death. How tragic it was. It's left a hole in this theatre that can never be filled." "Yes," Poirot said, leaning forward just slightly. "But there is more to this tragedy, I think. You have been at the heart of this theatre for many years, Madame. You must have known more about Margot than anyone else." Her smile faltered for just a moment, a crack in the mask she so carefully wore. Poirot caught it instantly, though he did not comment. "I knew Margot, of course," Veronica said, her voice colder now, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "She was a talented actress, though. She could be difficult at times. She had a way of being consumed by her roles, but then again, all artists are like that, aren't they?" Poirot didn't respond immediately. Instead, he observed her, noting how she avoided his gaze and focused instead on her fingers. A slight fidget, a signal of discomfort. He pressed on. Yes. The artiste's temperament, I know it well. But tell me, Madame, why is it that, according to everyone I spoke with, you seemed so eager to deflect any suspicion from your actors? You would say anything, do anything to protect them. Was that truly for their benefit, or was it to keep something hidden? Veronica's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, the tension in the room seemed almost unbearable. She folded her arms across her chest, her eyes hardening as if she had steeled herself for something. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "You don't understand the pressure of being in charge of all these people. Margot, she was more than just an actress to me. She was my responsibility." Poirot allowed the silence to hang in the air for a moment, letting her words settle before speaking. "Responsibility is a heavy burden, is it not? One that can lead to terrible consequences if we are not careful." Veronica's eyes flickered to his, and he saw a brief, almost imperceptible crack in her composure. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, her voice now tinged with something darker, more urgent. "I mean, Madame," Poirot replied, "that responsibility is often the motive for things we might not otherwise consider. When we are responsible for someone, we feel a need to control them, to protect them. Yes, but also to ensure that our own position remains secure. For someone like you, whose position in this theatre is everything, would it not be easier to eliminate the threat posed by someone like Margot?" The room was still. The words Poirot had spoken hung in the air, heavy with implication. Veronica did not immediately respond, but Poirot could see her breath hitch slightly as she sat up straighter, her fingers tapping nervously against the edge of the desk. "Why would I want to harm Margot?" she asked, her voice now strained but not without a sharp edge. "She was my star, my pride. She made this theatre what it is." "I would never, you would never," Poirot interrupted, his voice low but firm. But the truth, madame, is that sometimes we harm those we care about most, not out of malice, but out of a need to maintain control, a need to preserve the image we have created. And if that image is threatened, if someone like Margot becomes a danger to that image, then perhaps, in the heat of the moment, you might do what you thought was necessary. Veronica's face was pale now, her lips trembling slightly. She leaned back in her chair, her hands clenched tightly together as though she were trying to hold herself steady. "You think I killed her?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You think I could do such a thing?" Poirot met her gaze, his eyes unwavering. "No, madame, I think you did something much worse. You let her die. You allowed the circumstances to unfold in a way that would lead to her destruction. You didn't pull the trigger, but you created the environment that made it inevitable." Veronica swallowed, her gaze darting to the side for a moment, as though searching for something to hold on to. Finally, her eyes met Poirot's again, her voice a whisper of regret. "I never meant for it to go that far. But I couldn't let her overshadow me. She was talented, yes, but she was unpredictable. I thought if I could just keep her in line, keep her from going too far, but she wouldn't listen. She wanted too much, and then, when she came to me that night, telling me she knew everything, telling me she would expose us all." Poirot held her gaze. "Expose you all?" Veronica's face crumpled, and for the first time, her mask slipped entirely. She knew about the money, the missing funds, the things I had done to keep the theater running. I thought I could stop her. I thought I could make her disappear. I never meant for it to happen like this, but she wouldn't back down. She collapsed back into her chair, her voice breaking. "I didn't kill her, but I might as well have. I pushed her too far. I made her feel cornered. And now she's dead." Poirot watched her for a long moment, his mind racing as the pieces of the puzzle clicked together. He had suspected it, of course. He had suspected all along that the motive was not just personal, but financial, a desire to protect her position, her livelihood, even at the cost of a life. But now, as he saw the raw pain in Veronica's eyes, he knew that the truth had been far more complicated than a simple act of malice. And yet, as the pieces fell into place, Poirot understood something even deeper. Margot's death had not been a result of one person's guilt. It had been the culmination of many actions, many mistakes, all building up to a singular, tragic end. Veronica had played a part, yes, but the question now was who else had been involved, and who, ultimately, would pay the price for the lies and deceit that had brought them all to this point. Poirot remained silent, his sharp eyes never leaving Veronica's face. The truth had been laid bare before him. The financial misdeeds, the power struggles, the crushing pressures of maintaining control over a crumbling institution. Yet there was something still missing, a vital piece that prevented the entire story from coalescing. The guilt, yes, was undeniable. Veronica had played a role, a significant one, but the moment she had realized her actions were about to destroy her, it seemed, was the moment she had lost her composure. "I do not think, madame, that the matter ends here," Poirot said at last, his voice calm but piercing. Veronica looked up at him, startled by his words. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for a glass of water on the edge of the desk, her eyes darting about as though looking for something solid to hold on to. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her tone fearful. Poirot stood and began pacing slowly, the familiar rhythm of his steps a signal that his mind was already working through the problem with all its precision. "What I mean is that the story you tell me is not the complete one," he replied. "There is one thing that still remains unexplained, one piece that I cannot fit into the puzzle. The moment Margot came to you with her threats, there was something more at play. Someone else knew of your situation, someone who would have had the power to manipulate the circumstances." Veronica's face paled, her lips parting as though she were about to speak, but found no words to form. You see, madame, when I spoke to the others, your actors, your employees, it became clear that Margot's death had been foretold in more ways than one, and I've come to the conclusion that it was not you alone who had the means, nor the sole motive, to push Margot toward her inevitable fate. Veronica's eyes narrowed in a flash of defiance, and she rose from her chair, pacing now as Poirot had done. "You're accusing someone else now?" she demanded, a hint of fear in her voice. "Are you saying I did not take responsibility for what happened?" Poirot stopped pacing and turned to face her. "No, madame. I do not say that you are free from blame, but I believe you were merely a cog in a much larger, more intricate machine." He stepped closer to her, his eyes gleaming with a quiet intensity. "And the key to this machine, I believe, lies with someone you trust, someone who stood to gain far more than you from Margot's silence." She froze, her gaze flitting nervously toward the window, as though considering whether to run or face the inevitable. "You do not mean—" she began. But Poirot was already moving, his mind leaping ahead, putting the pieces of the puzzle together with lightning speed. "It was her," Poirot said simply, his eyes narrowing. "It was Sabine." Veronica's face drained of color, and for a long moment she said nothing. Poirot watched her closely, his gaze unwavering, until she slowly sank back into her chair. Her hands twisted in her lap, and her breath was shallow. She did not speak, yet the weight of the silence was enough to confirm Poirot's suspicions. "Sabine?" Veronica whispered finally, her voice trembling. You think she knew about the money, about the threat?" "I think she knew more than anyone else, madame," Poirot said, leaning forward slightly. "I think she knew exactly how to manipulate you, how to push you toward Margot, knowing full well that you would be driven to make a choice you would regret. Sabine was always the one in the background, always the one playing a role behind the scenes. She was the one who made sure you felt cornered, that you would do anything to keep the theater intact. But I do not believe for a moment that she acted out of the goodness of her heart. She, too, had a motive." Veronica's face grew strained, her features tightening as though the very idea of Sabine's involvement was too much to bear. "But why?" she asked, almost pleading. "Why would Sabine want to harm Margot? Why would she want any of this?" Poirot paused, his expression softening just for a moment. "Because, madame, Sabine had more than a passing interest in keeping the theater running smoothly. She had a great deal invested, both personally and financially. And when Margot threatened to expose the frauds, when she threatened to reveal that Sabine had been the one to funnel money out of the theater's account into her own private ventures, Sabine saw a way to destroy Margot's credibility before she could act." Veronica's eyes filled with realization, and she slumped back into her chair. Her face paled further, and for a moment she looked as if she were on the verge of tears. Poirot's voice softened, though he did not let her off the hook. "I believe that Sabine was the one who set everything into motion," he continued. "She used your fears and your sense of obligation against you, and once she had you cornered, she allowed you to take the blame while she ensured Margot's fate was sealed." Veronica's eyes flickered toward the door, and Poirot noticed the faintest glimmer of indecision in her gaze. It was clear she was considering whether to tell Poirot more or retreat further into her own denial. The moment stretched out, thick with tension, before Veronica finally spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I should have known," she said, her voice broken. "Sabine, she's always had that air of control, but I never thought—" "That's what she wanted, madame," Poirot interrupted gently. "To make you feel like you were in control, while she quietly steered everything toward her desired outcome." Veronica sat motionless for a long time, the weight of Poirot's words settling over her like a shroud. Finally, she exhaled shakily, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "You are right," she said quietly, the fight gone from her voice. "It was Sabine. She manipulated me, and I let her do it. I was too blinded by my own need to protect this theater, this This world I created. I never thought I would be capable of it, but I became just as ruthless as the people I despised. Poirot allowed her the space to speak, but there was no time for further reflection. He had known from the start that the solution to this case would not be as simple as a single culprit. The actions of multiple individuals had conspired to bring Margot to her untimely end, but now the task was to extract the truth from all of them. And Sabine would be next. "Madame," Poirot said, his tone firm once more, "it is not too late to make things right. I will see to it that Sabine is brought to justice, but you must cooperate fully. The truth, it seems, is a most difficult thing to accept, but you must do so if you are to be free of this burden." Veronica nodded slowly, her eyes haunted. "I will cooperate. I'll tell you everything, but please, Monsieur Poirot, I beg you, don't let Sabine destroy anyone else." Poirot nodded curtly, his mind already turning toward the next steps in the investigation. The truth had been uncovered, but the resolution was still to come. As he turned and walked toward the door, he could not help but feel a sense of inevitability settle in. The game, it seemed, was about to reach its final act. Poirot's investigation had now reached its peak, and there was no turning back. As he left the somber room where Veronica sat, her face a picture of guilt and sorrow, he felt a wave of finality sweep over him. He had all but pieced together the puzzle. Veronica, a woman burdened by ambition and regret, and Sabine, a woman driven by cold pragmatism, had both played their roles in the tragic death of Margot. But there was one last step before Poirot could be certain that justice would be served. As Poirot walked down the hallway of the theatre, the weight of the case pressed on him, but his mind remained as sharp as ever. The threads of deception had been woven carefully, each one designed to distract him from the deeper truths hidden beneath the surface. Yet, with every conversation, with every new revelation, the picture had slowly come into focus. His thoughts were interrupted as he reached the door to the small office where Sabine was waiting. The woman had not yet been interrogated, and Poirot had a strong suspicion that she had been waiting for him, perhaps anticipating his next move. He opened the door without hesitation, his presence filling the room. Sabine was seated behind her desk, her posture immaculate, her face expressionless. She looked every bit the picture of a poised and controlled woman. But Poirot knew better. Her control was a facade, an illusion carefully crafted to mask the inner turmoil that lay beneath. "Monsieur Poirot," she said coolly, her voice smooth, almost mocking, "I've been expecting you." Poirot nodded, his gaze steady as he closed the door behind him. "Ah, Madame Sabine, you are very clever. I see. You are always one step ahead. But you must know, it is impossible to escape the truth." Her lips curled into a smile, but there was no warmth in it. "The truth, Monsieur Poirot, is a very fluid thing. What you believe to be true may not always be so." Poirot took a step forward, his eyes never leaving her face. "You are a woman of great intelligence, Madame. That I cannot deny, but I believe your confidence will betray you in the end. You are not as invulnerable as you think." Sabine's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly, her fingers lightly tapping the surface of her desk. "What is it you want from me, Poirot? I presume you've come to accuse me of something, just as you did with Veronica." Poirot's eyes flickered with a hint of amusement. "Accuse you? No, Madame. I've already deduced the truth. You were the mastermind behind Margot's death. And I can prove it." Sabine's eyes widened ever so slightly, and for the briefest of moments, Poirot caught a flicker of something, a crack in her impenetrable armor. It was enough. He knew now that she was on the defensive. "I've had my suspicions about you from the beginning, you see," Poirot continued, his voice calm but laden with authority. "You had everything to gain from Margot's silence, the money you were embezzling, the way you were manipulating everyone behind the scenes. Your motives were clear to me. Sabine stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sharp, metallic sound. "You have no idea what you're talking about," she spat, her calm composure slipping for the first time. "I've worked hard for everything I've achieved. I built this theatre. I protected it. I protected all of you." Poirot remained unmoved, his gaze unwavering. "Perhaps you did, madame, but in the process, you destroyed others, and Margot, the one person who could expose you, was the one who paid the price." For a moment, Sabine's expression was unreadable, but then her shoulders sagged, and she let out a long, almost imperceptible sigh. "You don't understand," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I was trying to save everything. If Margot had gone to the authorities, if she had told anyone about the embezzling, it would have ruined everything. The theatre, the reputation, everything I had worked for, everything I built, would have been destroyed. I couldn't let that happen." Poirot stepped closer, his voice softer now. "You could have come forward, madame. You could have confessed and faced the consequences. But instead, you chose to protect yourself at any cost, even if it meant destroying others in the process." Sabine's face tightened, and for a moment, Poirot thought she might lash out. But instead, she clenched her fists and bowed her head. "I had no choice," she whispered. "I couldn't let it all fall apart." Poirot nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Ah, madame. You see, this is the fatal flaw in your reasoning. You believed that the ends justified the means. You thought you could control everything, that your lies could protect you. But in the end, it was your own greed, your own fear, that brought you down." For the first time, Sabine did not respond immediately. Instead, she stood motionless, her eyes staring at the floor as if contemplating her actions. The silence between them stretched on, thick with the weight of the realization that there was no escape for her now. Poirot had laid bare her deceit, her manipulation, her role in the death of Margot, and Sabine knew deep down that there was no room left for further denials. "I will give you one chance, madame," Poirot said, his tone firm. "You can come clean now, face the truth, and perhaps find some semblance of redemption, or you can continue to lie and attempt to evade the consequences. But you must know this. There is no escape from the truth. It will catch up with you sooner or later." Sabine's eyes lifted to meet his, and for a moment there was something in her gaze, a flicker of fear, of realization that told Poirot she knew her game was over. She had been caught, and there was no way out. With a deep breath, she straightened, as if steeling herself for what was to come. "I'll tell you everything," she said, her voice cold but resigned. "But you must understand, Poirot. I did it all for the theatre. I did it for the people who relied on me. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was saving them all." Poirot nodded solemnly. "The road to hell is paved with good intentions, madam, but it is your actions, not your intentions, that have led us here." And so, as Sabine began to recount the final details of her role in the tragedy, Poirot felt a strange sense of finality. The pieces of the puzzle were all but in place. There was no more uncertainty, no more room for doubt. The truth had been uncovered, and justice would soon follow. As Sabine's confession spilled into the room, Poirot listened intently, his expression as composed as ever. She spoke with the dispassion of someone who had long come to terms with their choices, but there was still a tremor in her voice, a subtle hint of the rawness beneath her carefully constructed exterior. Her tale was one of calculated deception, of a woman who had meticulously orchestrated the destruction of Margot's future to preserve her own. It was a story of desperation, of a soul willing to destroy the very thing it sought to protect. As Sabine recounted the days leading up to Margot's tragic fall from grace, Poirot's mind worked methodically, connecting the dots, reassessing every action, every word, every piece of evidence he had gathered. He thought back to the subtle inconsistencies in the testimonies, the odd glances exchanged between Veronica and Sabine, and the oddly timed interruptions by the theatre staff. Every moment now seemed to lead to this singular point: The death of Margot, the destruction of an innocent life, all for the preservation of a reputation. Yet as Sabine concluded her recounting of the events, Poirot was not satisfied. There were gaps in her story, areas that didn't quite add up. Sabine, though clever, had underestimated one crucial thing: Poirot's instinct for the deeper truths that people often overlooked. "You see, madame," Poirot began, his voice cutting through the heavy silence of the room, "there is one part of this story that troubles me." He allowed a brief pause to hang in the air, his piercing gaze fixed on Sabine, who now appeared slightly uneasy. "You have confessed to being the mastermind behind the plot, yes? You made sure that Margot would never speak of the financial malfeasance that threatened your empire. But what you fail to mention, what you fail to account for, is why you chose to act so swiftly, so decisively, without regard for the consequences." Sabine stiffened, her composure faltering. "What do you mean?" Poirot's eyes never wavered as he continued. "You see, your plan was methodical. You made sure to silence Margot permanently, not just because of her knowledge of the theatre's financial troubles, but because of something more personal. What I have come to realize, madame, is that you are not simply trying to protect your livelihood. You are trying to erase a threat to your own self-image, a threat that Margot posed to your carefully crafted persona." Sabine's eyes narrowed. "You're mistaken, Poirot," she said quickly, though her voice lacked its earlier confidence. Poirot smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "Am I? You see, in all your preparations to silence Margot, you overlooked one thing, your own pride. You wanted the world to believe that you were a woman of integrity, a self-made success. But what you couldn't bear was the possibility of someone like Margot revealing the truth about your personal life. A life far more complex, more troubled than anyone would suspect. You were not just hiding financial secrets, madame. You were hiding something far darker." Sabine stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, her hands trembling ever so slightly. "What do you think you know about me?" she spat, her mask slipping. "You know nothing of what I've sacrificed, of what I've done to keep this theatre afloat, to keep my position intact." Poirot took a step closer, his expression unwavering. "Ah, but I do, madame. I know everything. The affair you had with a prominent director years ago, the child you had to abandon when you were too young to understand the consequences. I know the secrets you've buried beneath layers of lies, the reputation you've built on the backs of others' sacrifices. You see, Margot knew all of it. She knew what you had done, what you still hoped to hide from the world. And that, madame, is why you had to silence her." Sabine's face twisted in a mixture of rage and shame, her gaze flickering with the guilt she had so long hidden. "You think you understand? You think you've figured me out?" she hissed, her voice now low and venomous. "I did what I had to do. I protected this theatre, my career. I was the one who kept everything running, who made sure people had jobs, who gave people something to aspire to, and in return, they all worshipped me, followed me blindly." Poirot nodded slowly, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "Yes, madame. You were their queen. But you were also their prison. You trapped them in your web of lies, just as you trapped yourself. You believed that the theatre, this empire you built, could save you from yourself, but it is nothing more than a house of cards, ready to collapse at the slightest touch." There was silence between them, heavy and suffocating. Sabine stood frozen, her eyes wide with the realization that Poirot had unraveled her entire existence. She had built her empire on a foundation of secrets, lies, and manipulation, and now that foundation was crumbling. "You see," Poirot continued, his voice softening, "it is not just the theatre that you tried to protect, madame. It was your very identity, the woman you wanted the world to believe you were, the woman you convinced yourself you were. But in the end, it was all a facade, wasn't it? And Margot's death was the final curtain, the one you orchestrated to ensure no one would ever see the real you." Sabine's face crumbled as the weight of the truth pressed upon her. Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time she seemed small, fragile, as if the woman who had once commanded the room had disappeared completely. She was left standing in the ruins of her own life, a woman who had built her empire on sand. Poirot did not immediately speak, allowing the silence to settle, to force Sabine to confront the reality of what she had done. He had known from the beginning that there was something deeper to this case, something more complex than mere financial gain. It had always been about control, about power, about maintaining an image at all costs. And now that image was shattered. "Madame," Poirot finally said, his voice firm but gentle. "The truth always has a way of revealing itself. No matter how carefully one tries to conceal it, it will find a way to the surface, and now it is time for you to face the consequences of your actions." Sabine remained motionless for a long moment, her face a mask of regret and defeat. Finally she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to kill her." Poirot nodded, his gaze unwavering. "But you did, madame. And now the consequences are yours to bear." As he turned to leave the room, his mind already moving to the next step in the investigation, Poirot felt no satisfaction, no triumph. There was only the quiet certainty that justice would be served. The truth had won, and in the end, that was all that mattered. As Hercule Poirot descended the staircase of the Théâtre Molière, Sabine Moreau's broken confession echoing in his ears, he felt no sense of closure. It was not his habit to let emotion cloud his judgment, but there was a heaviness that lingered, as though some subtle thread had yet to be drawn taut. Sabine had confessed, yes, but the manner of her words, her evasiveness in key moments, and the calculated pauses as she chose what to reveal and what to obscure, all weighed heavily in Poirot's mind. Outside, the grey Parisian dusk had gathered, the Seine a ribbon of murky silver threading its way through the city. Poirot turned up the collar of his coat and hailed a cab, instructing the driver to take him not to his hotel but to the office of Inspector Lefebvre. There were formalities to be handled, yes, but more than that, he needed to review the full police dossiers one last time. Sabine had confessed, but the puzzle remained only partially solved. He sensed a final movement in the shadows, one last trick yet unrevealed. At the Quai des Orfèvres, Lefebvre was waiting, tired-eyed and visibly impressed by the developments. He offered Poirot a seat and poured him a modest brandy. "You've done it again, Monsieur Poirot. The theatre world is still reeling. Sabine Moreau, no one would have guessed." Poirot took the glass with a nod, but did not drink. "Ah, mon ami. But you see, it is precisely when no one suspects a person that the mind of Hercule Poirot begins to suspect them. The greatest disguise is the one wrapped in respectability." "Still," Lefebvre said, leaning back in his chair, "with her confession, the case is all but closed." Poirot raised a finger. "Non, mon ami. It is not yet closed. Madame Moreau has confessed to engineering Margot's public downfall. Yes, but she did not explicitly confess to murder. And yet, murder it was. A woman like her does not push someone over the edge without calculating every consequence. That she denies the intent tells me one thing. Someone else helped bring about the final act." Lefebvre looked unconvinced. "But the evidence," Poirot waved a hand, "is incomplete. Consider this. The forged photographs, the altered appointment schedules, the precision of the rumor campaign, it was too perfect. Even for Sabine. And then there is Margot's final day. She leaves rehearsal early, distraught, then returns to her apartment only to be found dead mere hours later. You recall I asked you to retrieve the log of visitors from her building that evening?" Lefebvre nodded and reached for a folder on his desk. "It arrived this morning. Nothing remarkable at first glance. Her cleaning woman at 5, a delivery at 6. And," Poirot prompted. Lefebvre hesitated, then flipped a page. "A visit logged at 7:45, a man named Julien Deschamps, a stagehand." Poirot's eyes narrowed. Julien Deschamps. Mais oui, I remember him. He claimed to be loyal to Margot, yet spoke of her with a peculiar detachment. Do you have his address? Lefebvre stood. Of course. Shall I accompany you? Poirot shook his head gently. Non, mon ami. This requires delicacy. If he is not guilty, I do not wish to frighten him. And if he is, I must hear the truth from his own lips. An hour later, Poirot stood in the narrow hallway of a modest apartment building in Montmartre. The door was answered by a thin young man with dark circles under his eyes and nicotine-stained fingers, Julien Deschamps, unmistakably. His surprise at seeing Poirot was genuine. Monsieur Poirot, I didn't expect— I imagine you did not, Poirot replied mildly. May I come in? Julien hesitated, then stepped aside. The apartment was dim, sparsely furnished, with scattered scripts and old stage props tucked into corners. Poirot took it all in silently, then turned to face the young man. You visited Margot Lemoine the night she died. Julien's mouth tightened. Yes, I did. Poirot folded his arms. Why did you not mention this before? Julien swallowed. Because I was afraid. I knew how it would look. And how should it look, monsieur? Julien paced nervously. Margot called me earlier that day. She sounded broken. Said she needed someone to talk to. I cared about her, Poirot. Everyone assumed we were just friends, but He stopped himself. I went to see her, yes. She was a mess. She kept saying someone had set her up, that she didn't know who she could trust. I tried to calm her down. I stayed maybe 20 minutes. She asked me to leave. She was alive when you left. Of course she was. Julien's voice cracked. She was crying, but she was alive. Poirot nodded slowly. Did she name the person she believed was behind it all? No, Julien said, slumping into a chair. Only that it went higher than Sabine. She was certain Sabine wasn't working alone. She mentioned someone. She called them the ghost. But she wouldn't say more. Poirot went still. The ghost? Yes, Julien nodded. She said this person never appeared directly, but pulled strings from behind the scenes. Sabine was just their puppet. Poirot felt the pieces shift again in his mind. A deeper hand in the play, one that remained concealed. He turned toward the bookshelf near Julien's desk. His gaze settled on a framed photograph tucked behind a stack of scripts. He stepped forward and lifted it gently. Who is this? He asked. Julien stood quickly. That's my sister, Claire. Poirot blinked. Claire Deschamps? Yes, Julien said, visibly uneasy. She used to work at the theatre. Costumes. Left 2 years ago. Poirot said nothing for a moment. The name, the timing, the quiet efficiency of the manipulations. Claire Deschamps. It came together with sudden, stunning clarity. I must go, he said, softly, replacing the photograph. Merci, monsieur. Poirot walked swiftly through the Montmartre streets, the wind rising around him as the city lights flickered to life. Claire Deschamps. A former employee. Gone from the theatre, but not truly gone. The one person no one noticed. The one person with access to all the invisible seams of the production, the schedules, the props, the whispers. By the time he reached his hotel, his mind was racing. The final curtain had not yet fallen, and the true author of Margot's tragedy had not yet taken her bow. The next morning, Poirot stood once more at the Théâtre Molière, this time not for interrogation, but for revelation. Claire Deschamps was already there, summoned under the pretense of discussing costume archives. As she entered the dressing room where Poirot waited, she smiled faintly. Monsieur Poirot, a pleasure. Poirot bowed slightly. Mademoiselle Deschamps, you are the one they call the ghost, n'est-ce pas? Her smile faltered, just a fraction. He continued, you crafted the perfect illusion. Sabine believed she was in control, but you were always the one pulling the strings. You forged the letters, doctored the photographs, whispered into ears until Margot was isolated, broken. Then you stood back and watched it unfold. Claire said nothing. You were the architect of her destruction. Why? At last, her voice came, soft and brittle. She replaced me. I gave everything to that theater, to Sabine, and she cast me aside like nothing. Margot waltzed in, golden and adored. It wasn't fair. I needed them to feel what I felt. Poirot stared at her a moment longer. And so, you made them actors in your final performance. Claire lowered her gaze. Yes. Poirot took a breath. The theatre would survive. The play, as ever, would go on. But the curtain had fallen on the darkest act of all, and justice, at last, had found its voice.